A revolutionary journalist and activist, an honorary award-holding citizen in over 20 cities, with a street named after him in France, his case is said to be one of the most debated in modern legal history. Accused of killing a police officer in the 80s, Mumia Abu-Jamal has spent almost 3 decades on death row. In January, he was taken off death row and is now serving life behind bars without parole. For the first time since his transferal, he's speaking exclusively with RT from jail. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. My first question to you is, after almost 30 years on death row and now serving a life sentence without parole, if you weren't behind bars right now, if you could be anywhere else in the world, where do you think you would be, and what would you be doing?
Well, it depends on my frame of mind. I've always been, since my earliest years, what one would call an internationalist. That is, I pay attention to what's happening in other parts of the world, and as an internationalist, I'm thinking about life lived by other people all around the world. Of course, as an African American, I would love to spend some time in parts of Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, West Africa for the most part, because that's where most African Americans hail from. But it's also true that I have many friends and loved ones in France. I would like to...
This call is from the State Correctional Institution at Mahanoy and is subject to monitoring and recording.
I would like to spend some time in France. I would really like to bring my family, my wife, and my kids to come see our street in Paris.
That's right, because you have a street named after you in France. Now, Mumia, I was wondering, being behind bars, you seem to be watching world affairs much closer than most people who are free to walk the streets. And I want to ask you, which event of the last 30 years would you really want to be a part of, if you could?
I think first would probably be the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, because, of course, while it was South African, it was also global, because it was the touch point of white supremacy versus the freedom and dignity of African people. So South Africa would certainly be a, logical first choice. But wherever people are fighting for freedom, that kind of whets my appetite, and it gets my attention and moves my passion.
You turn 58 at the end of the month, which means you will have spent more than half of your life behind bars, and most people can't even begin to imagine that. What is it like? How has it changed you?
Well, I think in some ways I'm that same guy, and in many ways it's impossible for me to be that guy. The point of fact, I've spent most of my life, the bigger percentage of my life, on death row, and I cannot have had a profound effect on consciousness and on the way one sees and interacts with the world. I like to tell myself that I've actually spent a lot of that time beyond the bars and in other countries and, in other parts of the world, because I did so mentally. But, mental can only take you so far. The truth of the matter is I spent most of my living years in my lifetime on death row. So in many ways, even to this day, in my own mind, if not in fact, I'm still on death row.
Your story has really become a symbol for many of a flawed justice system. Do you personally have any faith left in a fair and free justice system? You've described in your work the prison system in the United States as the war on the poor, prisons being built to get rid of the broke and the homeless. Do you have any faith left in that system at all, considering you are obviously so much part of it, and your life has been so much affected by it?
Well, while it's true that I have very little faith in the system today, it's also true that I had very little faith in the system when I was a young person, when I was even a teenager. That's because when I looked around me, I saw the face of repression, if not the same thing we have today, but at a greater, more intense level. You could not say in the 1970s, or the 1960s at least, that the American community suffered from mass incarceration. Today you can say that in a way, in a scope that was frankly quite unthinkable back then. When I was a teenager and I was in the Black Panther Party, I remember going to downtown Manhattan and protesting against the political imprisonment and incarceration and the threats facing Angela Y. Davis. And I remember, you know, of course, like many other Panthers, reading her works and finding when she attacked the prison system, she talked about the perhaps 250,000 or 300,000 people imprisoned all throughout the United States as not just a problem that need to be dealt with, but a crisis, a situation that bordered on fascism. Well, fast forward 30, 40 years until the present, there are more than 300,000 prisoners in California alone, one state out of 50. The imprisonment in California, notice I'm not talking about the United States, but in California alone, exceeds that of France, of Belgium, of England, and perhaps I could name 4 or 5 other countries combined. So we could not perceive back then of what it would become, and you know, so it's monstrous when you really look at what's happening today. You can literally talk about millions of people being part, that is, incarcerated by the prison industrial complex today, men, women, and children. And that level of mass incarceration, really mass repression, has to have an immense impact and effect on the outer community, not just among families, but in a social and communal consciousness way, and the inculcation of fear among generations. So it's at a level and at a depth that many of us could not even fathom or dream of today.
You know, I can't help but wonder, you talk about so many important social and economic issues in your work. Do you have a dream today? If you could see one of those aspects changed, which one would you pick? What do you wish you could see happen in the United States?
There's never one thing. I mean, it's a sexy question, and I understand it, and I will address it. But the point is, because the system is a system of interconnectedness, and because one part of the system impacts another part of the system, and because what Antonio Gramsci called hegemony of the ideological system impacts other parts of the system, you can't change one thing that'll impact all things. I think, if anything, that's one of the lessons of the 1960s, because the civil rights movement was talking about, say, integration, this and that, and changing the schools. In point of fact, if you look at the vast majority of working class and poor black kids in American schools today, they live and spend their hours and their days in a system profoundly as segregated as that of their grandparents. But it's not segregated by race, it's segregated by race and class. Formerly class, which impacts race. The great Jonathan Kozol, who has researched American education for 40 years, has written in one of his most recent books that the American educational system is an apartheid system. I know from my personal interaction with my own family, you know, talking to my wife and my kids and even the grandkids, that the schools that my grandchildren go to are worse than the schools I went to when I was in my minor years and in my teenage years. That's a condemnation of a system. But because former generations only concentrated on one thing or one side of the problem, the problems really got worse and worse and worse. And while there's a lot of rhetoric about schools, American schools are a tragedy. That's the only thing they can be called. Well, I would rephrase that. American schools in many of the black and Latino communities are not a tragedy. They are a crime.
You were monitored by the FBI at the age of 14, and I want to ask you, now with laws such as the NDAA being passed in the United States where people are watched, detained, and can be held, that's become easier than ever. Do you think Big Brother has officially shown his face in this country at this point?
Well, let's look at it this way. If you look back at the COINTELPRO era, if you look back at the COINTELPRO era in those files, of not just me, but hundreds of thousands of people who are active in the black liberation movement, in the women's liberation movement, in the anti-war movement, even in the animal liberation movement, all these movements that we're supposedly have the constitutional right to participate in. What is clear is that the FBI and their leaders and their agents knew that everything they did then was illegal. And FBI agents were taught and trained how to break into places, how to do what they call black bag jobs and that kind of stuff, how to commit crimes. But this is what they were also told. You better do it, and you better not get caught, because if you get caught, you're going to jail, and we'll act like we don't know you. You're on your own. What has happened in the last 20 and 30 years? Well, not just the NDAA, but the so-called Patriot Act has made everything that was illegal back in the 1960s and 1950s and 1970s, they've legalized it. They've legalized it. They've legalized the very things that FBI agents and administrators knew was criminal back then. That means they can look in your mail, they certainly can read your email, they tap your phones, they do all of that, but they do it in the name of national security, but they do it nonetheless. What we live in today is a national security state where Big Brother is legalized, rationalized.
You've described politicians once as prostitutes in suits, giving your apologies to honest prostitutes. So I want to ask you, it's election season in the United States right now. Who do people trust? Who would you vote for?
Nobody, frankly. I mean, let me put it this way. I have seen no one that I could, in good conscience, vote for today. Because most of the people that are out there are the two major political parties, and when they talk, all I hear is a kind of madness, an unreasonableness, a wish to return to days of yore, the 1950s. Or they talk about the perpetuation of the American empire, imperialism. My God, I mean, what is there to vote for? How many people consciously, when they go to the polls, are voting for imperialism, or voting for more war, or voting for their son?
This call is from the State Correctional Institution at Mahanoy and is subject to monitoring and recording.
Son or daughter or father or mother, for that matter, to become a member of the armed forces and to become a mass murderer.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
A bomber.
Sir, can I just ask you very quickly, since we have 60 seconds, I just want to ask you lastly, you seem to have endorsed the Occupy Wall Street movement that has sprung up all over the United States this year.
Right.
Is this the type of uprising that you think could change America and do good for the United States?
I think it's the beginning of the kind of uprising, because it has to be deeper, it has to be broader, it has to address issues that are touching on the lives of poor and working class people. I think it has a ways to go to make that.
You have 30 seconds remaining.
But I think it's a damn good beginning. I just wish it was bigger and angrier.
Since our time is running out, Mumia, can I ask you, you're the voice of the voiceless. What is your message to your supporters today, right now, who are listening to you?
In the words of Kwame Ture, organize, organize, organize. And I love you all, and I thank you for fighting for me. Now let's fight together to be free.
Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for talking with us. The best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.